This is the King 65 Pro from Montech. Their cut down, more affordable version of the widely popular King 95 Pro. Coming in black or white and available with 3 included ARGB fans for just £80 in the UK or $80 in the US, the King 65 Pro is a dual chamber case that a lot of people have likely been intrigued by. It offers that Lian Li 011 dual chamber style look, but with a much more friendly budget and 3 included fans. Something that Montech seems to have nailed in my previous reviews of their cases is just the sheer amount of value that they offer. They're always incredibly well built for the price without cutting too many corners too. Well, I suppose speaking of corner cutting, the King 65 Pro has done exactly the opposite of that and replaced the curved glass found on the King 95 with a more traditional squared off design, putting the corner quite literally back in. Overall, the actual feel of the case is rock solid. The glass and steel panels are thick and there's some real weight and heft to the chassis. Don't be fooled by the price. This isn't some cheap Lian Li knockoff like we've seen hundreds of before. Trust me, Montech is the real deal, and when value is their priority, it's hard to fault them. Now, on that note of value, how does this compare to the older brother, the King 95 Pro? Well, there's actually quite a lot of differences or downgrades compared to the King 95 Pro. The King 65 is essentially using the exact same chassis, with just a few minor tweaks. I think it's interesting to compare them because if you want to spend just that bit more or bit less, you'll likely want to know what you're missing out on or how Montech have managed to hit that lower price point of $80 for the King 65. I mean, in the USA, the King 65 Pro is basically half the price of the King 95 Pro, so that's definitely something you'll want to consider when you're building your next PC. The other thing worth remembering is that there's a King 95 non-Pro version. There's no such thing for the King 65, with the only difference being the lack of fans and fan hub. So that's absolutely something to consider when the price of that version, the King 95 non-Pro, is the same as the King 65 Pro in the UK right now. You following along? For the interest of time, I'll make this as quick fire as possible and run down the changes that I've spotted between the King 95 Pro and the King 65 Pro. Firstly, and perhaps the most minor change between the King 95 Pro and King 65 Pro, is that the accessories for the King 65 come in a bag instead of a box. There's also no optional mesh front panel for the King 65, though the tooling and all the hinging fan bracket still remains. The King 65 loses the 3 120mm reverse blade fans at the bottom, which I guess are worth about £7 each if you're counting the price. Also, there's no diffused ARGB strip on the front of the King 65 Pro like there is on the King 95s. There's also no option for a blue or red model of the King 65 Pro either. Along the top of the case, there's no raised perforated top panel. There's obviously no curved glass. And I'm not sure if it's a downgrade, but the King 65 Pro in black has tinted tempered glass versus clear on the King 95. For me, that is a downgrade. I'm a big fan of clear, but I do know a lot of people prefer that darker look. The included ARGB fan hub is smaller on the King 65, down from 10 to 6. Oh, and there's about 2 or 3 less cable grommets, and that's about all of the things I can remember. Overall though, there's not too many downgrades. We've still got 2 reverse blade 140mm fans for intake on the side and a 120mm fan on the rear for exhaust as standard. And anything that isn't glass is covered with mesh. So if none of those downgrades or side grades on some things are potential deal breakers for you, then keep watching and listening. Also, if you've made it this far into the video and my face hasn't offended you, don't forget to get subscribed and click that like button. It's really appreciated. But with pricing and model differences aside, let's turn our attention back to the King 65 Pro and take a closer look at the exterior and build quality. And I've got some good news for you. This thing is built like an absolute tank. Yes, there's usually something that doesn't quite line up, but I'll be honest, it's very rare that a case arrives in perfect condition anyway. Now, one thing I did spot with this King 65 Pro is that it had a slight flaw, where there's this weird flex to the metal right above that glass front panel, which is kind of obvious. And I actually watched a Gamers Nexus video about this case a few months ago, and their case actually suffered from the same flaw. Now, I'll be honest, this case was sent out by Montech to me about 6 months ago, and due to personal reasons, I've not been able to get this video out until now. So perhaps that issue has been fixed, and maybe that was just like a launch batch. I'm not really sure. I'll have to rely on you guys in the comments to let me know if you've picked up one of these cases and it has that very similar flaw. Looking around the chassis, there's still a lot to like though. The top and side panels are basically all mesh with a nice thick support around the perimeter. This just helps to keep that extra rigidity for these panels. One thing I will note is that all the mesh is pretty fine. There's no dust filters on the top or side panels. So dust buildup could be a possibility if you have pets or leave your windows open a lot or have your PC sat on the floor. Though there is a dust filter on the bottom of the case if you want to populate that area beneath the GPU with some fans for extra intake. The rear of the case features ample ventilation around the expansion slots, providing better airflow in and out of the chassis. Plus, if needed, you can also access the hard drive cage from the back, which is a nice option. All of the panels are toolless, with each side panel and the glass panels secured by just 2 captive thumb screws for added stability. The glass panels feature metal frames, enhancing the overall rigidity, making them easier to attach and remove. Additionally, the mesh top panel can be quickly removed, providing easy access to a detachable radiator mount if needed. Then finally, up front, the King 65 comes equipped with a clicky power button and a dedicated RGB control switch, along with separate jacks for audio connectivity. The King 65 features 2 USB 3.0 Type A ports and a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port. But that's enough about the outside. Who cares about that anyway? Who cares how the case looks? The inside is where the magic happens. Removing that tempered glass panel is easy enough. Loosen the thumb screw at the back and then just give the metal tab a quick push to pop it off. Then you can remove the front panel glass nice and easily and give yourself a much more open area to work with. Easily my favorite part about working in dual chamber cases is having that extra way to just maneuver your arms. Now we are inside, we can get a closer look at the included RX 140 and AX 120 fans. Now these Montech fans aren't the greatest. They're what I'd describe as starter fans. Perfect for now, but you might want to upgrade them down the line for more performance or better acoustics. All 3 fans are already wired for you to the hub at the rear, though the cable on the rear exhaust fan is a little bit short and you'll need to make sure that you don't get it trapped when installing your motherboard. Now we are inside the chassis, we can see where Montech has added a piece of plastic to the frame where the old curve was, which is perhaps a little bit lazy or perhaps a genius idea. I'm not really sure which way to sit on that fence. But if it keeps the cost down, then it's hardly an issue, is it? Another leftover from the King 95 is the hinging fan bracket I mentioned earlier on the side of the case. With the King 95, you could swap this glass front panel for a mesh front panel, and then you could hinge those fans round to the front to get bonus airflow. Even though there's no mesh option for the King 65, all the tooling still remains, which is actually a slight issue for the King 65 that we'll discuss later on regarding some thermals. Now let's talk briefly about compatibility in the King 65 Pro. At the rear of the case, we have room for just one 120mm fan. Up top, we can fit 3 120mm fans or 2 140mm fans. The bottom can accommodate 3 120mm fans, or you can fit 2 140mm fans. Then on the side of the chassis, you can fit 2 120 or 2 140mm fans. So as you can expect, radiator compatibility is fairly straightforward. A 240 or 280 at the side, then a 360 up top. Montech has no mention about being able to mount a radiator at the bottom, but I see no reason as to why you couldn't fit a 360 down there as well, especially if you're doing some sort of custom loop. If you go with an air cooler, the maximum CPU tower cooler height is 175mm, so you should be able to mount pretty much any massive tower cooler you can get your hands on. Maximum GPU clearance is up to 420mm, and for storage you can fit up to 5 2.5-inch SSDs or 2 3.5-inch hard drives and 3 SSDs simultaneously. My favorite part, cable management. I'm always a sucker for a case that's loaded with Velcro ties, grooves, channels, clips, and covers. The King 65 Pro is what I've described as positively mid. It doesn't really offer anything other than 3 Velcro ties and 1 giant metal door, but because it's a dual chamber case, you don't really need to bother. There's just so much room behind the motherboard, you can just stuff cables wherever you want, and then when you're more or less done, just close that hinge door and forget it ever happened. As a bonus, if you're not making use of the hard drive caddies at the rear, you could just remove the cage altogether to give yourself even more room, or potentially just use the cage as a great place to store a fan hub or RGB control box instead, or just stuff more cables in. The included ARGB and fan hub is located well out the way of the main chamber run, which is something I massively appreciate. I always hate it when cases give you a cable route to follow, but most of it is already taken up because of the case cables like the USB, the power switch, and so on, and it just leaves no room for the big chunky PSU connections. If you want, there's also plenty of cable tie points if you really want to get down and dirty with your cables, and that's kind of about it. The real beauty of a dual chamber case is that you just kind of don't have to. The King 65 offers nothing exceptional at all, but it's adequate and it's easy enough to work with. Now let's talk about thermals within the King 65. Out of the box, it's not going to compete with the King 95 Pro as it's missing 3 fans, but temps aren't exceptional. There's likely a few reasons for this though. The main one is those starter fans I mentioned. They're just not quite up to the task of keeping this King 65 cool on their own. Like, it's fine, but either you'll probably want to upgrade them or just add more fans down the line. They'll do the job absolutely perfectly once you've built your system, but you could be getting more airflow with lower noise levels if you were to upgrade them to something better quality, basically. Now, another downside for the King 65 Pro is its lack of versatility. The King 95 has the option for the front panel to be mesh, as well as the side fans to swing around and just combine into an absolute wind tunnel of a case. The King 65 doesn't have that option. As a result, the side fans are kind of placed just too far away from the side panel to have any proper effect on keeping things cool inside the system. In the default configuration under our combined CPU and GPU torture test with MSI Combustor, the CPU topped out at 78 degrees exactly. But as we remove some panels, things start to improve, and if we leave the fans in their default configuration, but remove the rear side panel, which covers up all the cables at the back, the temperatures drop by about 1.7 degrees. Reinstalling the side panel, but removing the hinged cable cover, which covers up most of our cables and the fans, the temps drop by 1.9 degrees versus the default. If you want to just remove that hinge panel and the side panel, and basically leave everything open, you can drop temperatures by about 3.4 degrees, bringing the King 65 Pro more in line with other cases I've tested. The GPU unfortunately suffers a very similar fate. A default GPU temperature of 65.5 degrees, which is the second highest of any case I've tested. But as you remove some panels, you can see the temperature gradually dropped to a more respectable 62.6 degrees. The King 95 Pro manages to avoid this issue just by coming with 3 extra fans at the bottom of the chassis as standard. This helps to just bring in more cool air. Realistically though, this isn't a deal breaker, and a chassis of this size and this price, you'll probably want to maybe populate the available fan slots a bit more anyway. Maybe grab some matching Montech fans, or maybe just buy like a multi-pack of Arctic fans. But before you do that, have a quick listen to this noise test, just so you know how these Montech fans sound before you rush out to maybe buy some more for the case. So then, there you have it, the King 65 Pro. This is a case that I've really struggled to summarize, and I found this conclusion a difficult one to sum up. I think what it really comes down to is a few outcomes. Do you like the King 95 Pro but can't afford it? If so, how about the King 95 without any fans? And then just add your own. If that's still too much, then the King 65 Pro will fit that spot for you. If you plan on upgrading their fans later down the line anyway, personally I'd recommend the King 95 non-Pro version, as it's just a much more flexible case with more quality of life features, and it's probably more suited for those who already have a PC with case fans that they want to reuse when they're changing chassis, as opposed to just starting from scratch. If you are a first-time builder, however, the King 65 Pro is a good budget option that can give you plenty of room to work down the line and give you a bit of room to grow in the future. At the end of the day, if you buy a King 65 Pro and this thing looks exactly how you want your PC case to look, then it's a really well-built case for the price. There's no rattly side panels, all the panels are easy to remove and work with. It's a solid case. It's just priced uncomfortably close to its kind of superior older brother. Maybe that's a little bit of a tactic from Montech to step you up to that case, but what this does offer is a high quality dual chamber case to a much lower price section of the market with a few fans included. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of the video. What do you think? Could you see yourself grabbing the King 65 Pro? Or if you'd like me to check out any other PC cases, leave your suggestions in the comment section down below. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to click that like button. And if my face hasn't offended you, don't forget to get subscribed. If you want to check out the King 65 Pro or any of the products I've used in this system or the other cases I've mentioned, check the description for my affiliate links, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Cheers.